Hey there everyone, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn, a blog about DIY home and garden. And here on this channel, I usually post videos about houseplant care and propagation, different DIY tutorials, maybe some gardening here and there. And today we're doing some houseplant stuff. We are talking about Hoya flowering. I did a video all about this specific plant here. This is a Hoya carnosa compacta or a Hoya rope plant. But today it's also the star of the show because as you can see, it is going nuts with these gorgeous blooms. And this is not the first time this plant has bloomed either. So we are going to talk about some of the things you might want to keep in mind when you're trying to get your Hoya to bloom, some of the things you might be doing wrong, some of the things you can do to encourage blooming, and just some general Hoya care tips, all based from my personal experience in getting multiple Hoya plants to flower. Okay, so I've got a little list here so I don't forget all of the stuff that I want to cover. The very first thing, the most important thing is light. So Hoyas in general can be pretty flexible with their lighting requirements, but they will truly thrive in bright indirect light. Some Hoyas can even take direct light, like this Hoya obscura here. This one, you can see it's sun stressed. The leaves are getting a little bit darker in areas where it's getting direct sunlight. This one is in a south facing window, and man, in the summer it just gets absolutely pelted with light. Whereas this one, rope plant, and a lot of the other Hoyas I have, they do a little bit better in bright indirect light. So if you're not giving your plant enough light, if you have it in lower light levels or even medium light levels, it is probably not going to flower. So shoot for something like a south or I would say west facing window. I've even had some Hoyas in east facing windows and they have flowered before. It just depends on how much light the window gets, if it's obstructed outside by like a tall building or something like that. So keep in mind that you want to shoot for the most amount of light possible. Right now, I have this big boy in a west-facing window here in my sunroom. It is a super dark, gloomy day today, but when it's sunny, it is sunny in here. It feels like the surface of the sun. So I think that has a lot to do with why this one keeps blooming over and over again. So the second thing I want to talk about when it comes to Hoya flowering is soil. So you want to make sure you have a lightweight soil that you're using and that it isn't retaining too much water. So I have all of my Hoyas in a mix, usually of just like some sort of high quality houseplant soil that comes pre-mixed with coconut fibers and perlite, maybe even some orchid bark. And depending on how light the soil is when I pot the plant, I might even throw in some more perlite or some more bark. It really just depends. But you want to make sure the soil has a lightweight moisture retention and that the pot isn't too big for your plant's root ball. So this plant right here, I have had for several years and I have not repotted it once. Okay, so being in a pot that's like pretty snug can sometimes help to encourage flowering in my experience. And when you have your plant in a pot that isn't too big for its root ball and you're using a lightweight soil, that leads to your plant retaining only the amount of moisture that it needs to retain to stay happy and healthy. So think about your soil and how light it is if you're looking at plants that you are wondering why they might not have flowered yet. So for number 3, I want to talk about water. So water and soil obviously go hand in hand and pot size. If you have a pot that's too big for your plant or your soil is too dense, then it's just going to retain too much water. And Hoyas do not like being overwatered. They do not like sitting in water. They don't like getting water too often. I always err on the side of underwatering these plants. So for these Hoya plants, I will generally wait until probably like maybe even up to 2 weeks in the summer, spring and summer, before watering these plants again. I've really been pushing it lately to see how long they can go without water because withholding water can be a good practice for getting the plant to flower and helping to encourage it to flower. But once the leaves start wrinkling here, I will show a close-up shot. That really means like it's no kidding time to water. Once you see that wrinkling, then you might notice if you don't water it, the leaves will start like turning yellow, especially down near the soil line, and the plant's health overall will start to suffer. So you don't want to overwater it. You don't want to underwater it, but maybe like erring on a little underwatering could be not the end of the world for your plant. As you can see here, I generally have let all of my Hoyas in this room go for like upwards of 3 weeks over the fall and winter without watering them. And all of them are just fine. Okay, so what if your plant is in optimal lighting conditions, it has a great, chunky, well-draining soil, and you're not overwatering it. In fact, you may be erring on the side of underwatering it, and it's still not flowering. Then what do? Well, you can consider adding some sort of fertilizer or nutrient boost to the plant. I generally am not a big plant fertilizer person. I know that might sound kind of crazy. Everyone seems to use houseplant fertilizers to help with their plants, but honestly, I have burned plants in the past, literally burned them using chemical fertilizers. So that has made me a little bit gun shy when it comes to using fertilizers. I have used a liquid dirt concentrated plant food over the last couple years, and then this year I'm also starting to use a Fox Farms Grow Big soil, only because I got it for my gardening plants outside and for seed starting. So I figured, why not try it on my houseplants as well? And it seems to be doing fine. They just got their first dose of it not long ago, considering I don't usually fertilize too much in the off season, and they seem to be happy. That said, you could also try to switch to a fertilizer that encourages blooms. So I generally don't use any sorts of those fertilizers on my plants indoors, so I can't really say how much one way or the other it helps. However, I have seen people sing the praises of different fertilizers for blooms on their hoyas. Specifically the orchid fertilizers that you spray onto the plant's foliage. So instead of like putting it in the water, you would spray it all over the plant here. They come in like little spray bottles, and supposedly that can help a lot with hoya flower production. I would love to try that to see if it helps, but it's so hard to know if that's actually the thing that helped your hoya bloom or if it's one of the other many things you're doing. So if you've tried that with success, please let me know. I would love to hear what type of orchid fertilizer you have used. And then say you're doing all of these things right, but your plant still isn't blooming. I'm sorry to say that maybe it's just gonna take time. I have some hoyas that I have had for many, many years, and they have no signs of blooms on them whatsoever. Sometimes it just can take maturity for a plant to start blooming. And you can be doing all of the things right, giving it lots of bright light, a nice chunky soil, erring on the side of underwatering, and giving it the occasional nutrient boost, and the plant still won't bloom. This one did not start blooming until it was very large. I have another rope that has never produced a peduncle in its entire life, and it's a pretty big plant. It's like, I'd say a little bit smaller than this one. This plant I have had for several years, and I was actually just watering it this morning, and I saw for the first time the first peduncle on this plant. Of course, up here it is, right here. Still no flowers, but the fact that there is a peduncle there means that there is a flower coming. And where there's one peduncle on a plant, you will usually see some more come, at least in my experience. It's usually not just one per plant unless it's a really small plant. So that's very exciting. Sometimes they can just blend in with the plant. And so you want to do like a nice peduncle check every couple weeks, especially in the spring and summer. So even though you will hear a lot about how plants need to be mature before they're flowering, I got this plant, this Hoya obscura, as a small cutting. It was like 2 of these bottom leaves when I first got it from one of my friends. And this has been one of my most successful propagations. Like, you guys, I love this plant so much. It's climbing all over this awesome trellis, which, by the way, I made this trellis. I have a video I will link about how to make these as well with a laser cutter. But you can see this one is only like a year old. It's a little baby plant that I grew from a teeny tiny baby, and it has got a flower here. It is coming. It's gonna open really soon. So I was shocked to see that, but super excited. And same thing with this one. This little guy here, another one of my newer plants. He has 2, 3, 4 peduncles. It has never actually bloomed, but it has 4 peduncles on this little plant. So I am really hopeful that if I withhold water for a couple weeks while we head up into spring here where I live, that this will help force the plant to pop out some blooms, because man, it is so frustrating to see so many peduncles on a plant but never get any blooms. And speaking of the peduncles on the plants, after your plant is done flowering, do not cut it off. Leave it on, because it will bloom over and over and over from the exact same spot, which is pretty cool. So once a plant produces a peduncle, like your gold, it's gonna start producing flowers over and over from that same spot. I will show a couple close-up shots of me removing spent flowers from the peduncle without actually removing the peduncle. And as you'll see with some of the peduncles that I'll show in a close-up shot here, they get longer each time they bloom. So like, I don't know how long these things are gonna get by the time this one has bloomed, you know, like 10 times. I think this one's probably about on its 5th or 6th round of blooming, and it has, gosh, I would say like upwards of 15 peduncles on it, which is pretty amazing. Blooms year round, no rhyme or reason. It's not just spring and summer that it blooms. So, you know, I've heard that they're more likely to bloom in the spring and summer, but I have to say in my experience, it is early March and this thing has been blooming since early February, and it's very cold where we're at in Maryland right now. So leave the peduncle on after the plant has bloomed. Do not cut it off. And if you do take a cutting of a plant that has a peduncle on it, chances are that that peduncle may actually stay on and produce a flower after you've rooted the cutting. I have had that happen with one hoya. I got a cutting that had a peduncle on it. It had never bloomed. I rooted the cutting in water, and while I was rooting the cutting in water, it actually bloomed. It was crazy. I didn't even think it would be able to do that without the nutrients and fertilizer in soil. So that tells you a lot about how resilient these plants are and how sometimes flowering can just be a crapshoot. Okay, so a quick recap of how to get your hoya to flower. 1, plenty of light, bright and direct light. Make sure you don't burn the leaves. 2, a light, well-draining, airy soil that prevents too much water retention, and they don't mind being a bit pot-bound or root-bound in their pots. 3, don't overwater. Overwatering will not only kill your hoya, but it will not encourage it to flower. Err on the side of underwatering, and I've even heard people say that if you withhold water for several weeks leading up to spring, that can help force blooms. I've tried it. Can't say if it was that or if it was something else that helped for the plant flower, but these are pretty resilient plants that can go a long time without water. And last but not least, you can add some nutrients. No, that's not last but not least. You can add nutrients if you need to. Last but not least is sometimes you just have to wait for the plant to mature. Sometimes you can get lucky, like with a young plant like this one. Sometimes you'll have a plant that you've had forever and you're just dying for it to bloom, like probably 10 of my hoyas in this room. And you just have to keep giving it optimal care and hoping that your day for blooms will come soon. So if you have any more tips on hoya blooming, I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you have any questions, please drop them below. In the meantime, make sure to hit that follow button and subscribe for more videos about houseplants, gardening, DIY, all that sort of creative planty type stuff. So until then, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.